She was 21 years old. She had a dog named Murphy, a fiancé she had known since she was 15, and 3 weeks left until she graduated college. She had paint on her hands, a sketchbook in her bag, and a future that was just starting to take shape. And one night, she simply stopped existing. Goodbye, no mourning, no body to bury for almost 2 years, just silence. This is the story of Caitlyn Markham, and before we talk about what happened to her, you need to know who she was, because that part matters more than anything else in this video. Dave Markham remembers the exact moment his life changed. Not the moment he got the call that she was missing. Not the moment detectives knocked on his door. The moment that changed everything for Dave was much quieter than that. It was the moment a nurse walked out and placed a 20-minute-old baby girl into his arms. Caitlyn was adopted. Dave had chosen her, deliberately, completely, with open arms, and from the second he held her on that couch and just stared at her, he said he could not look away. His words, years later, still carry the same feeling. You couldn't resist Caitlyn. Dave Markham did not lose a child by accident of biology. He chose this child. He built his entire world around her. And what was done to her, and to him, over the next 13 years is something no parent should ever have to survive. Caitlyn grew up in Fairfield, Ohio, a quiet suburb north of Cincinnati. Small town, safe streets, the kind of place where violent crime was so rare that when something dark happened, the whole community felt it. She had a younger sister named Allie, 4 years behind her. Allie was 15 years old when her sister disappeared. 15. The age when you still need your big sister to show you how the world works. Allie lost that guide overnight. And the tragedy is, she would spend the next 12 years watching the main suspect sit alongside her grieving family, crying at vigils, hugging her father, performing grief so convincingly that even people who doubted him were not sure enough to say it out loud. Caitlyn herself was not the kind of person you forget after meeting her once. She was bubbly in the way that made everyone around her feel seen. She had goofy energy, contagious laughter, and a personality that filled every room she walked into. But her real language was art. She always had her camera with her, always had her sketchbook. She volunteered to paint murals at school events without being asked. Her high school art teachers saw it early, real talent, not just enthusiasm. By 2011, she was studying graphic design at the Art Institute of Ohio in Cincinnati. She was weeks away from graduating. On the side, she worked at David's Bridal, saving every dollar for the future she was building. Her father called her pragmatic, and he meant it as the highest compliment. The future she was saving for had a specific shape: Colorado, a fresh start, her degree in hand, a career in front of her, a chance to finally breathe. And then there was John Carter. Carter was a year older than Caitlyn. They had met when she was 15. Their friends called them each other's yin and yang. People liked him. Caitlyn's family liked him. Her father gave Carter his blessing when Carter asked permission to propose. The ring he gave her was a family heirloom. To the world, it looked romantic. But in a relationship that was already suffocating her, a family heirloom is not just jewelry, it is an anchor. A silent message from his family that whispered, "You belong to us now." By the summer of 2011, Caitlyn had told one of her closest friends something she had been carrying alone for months. "I don't love him anymore." She told her friend she was exhausted by his destructive lifestyle and the toxic habits that had taken over his life. She felt worn down by the constant pressure he put on her, asking her to do things she did not want to do. She felt trapped, not physically, but emotionally, financially, socially. After 6 years together, Carter had become woven into every part of her world, which is exactly why what his mother did in late July was so important to understand. Caitlyn walked into a local credit union with Carter's mother to apply for a credit card. The bank manager remembered the moment clearly years later. Carter's mother looked at Caitlyn and said, "I'll co-sign the visa, but you have got to take my son to Colorado with you." The manager turned to Caitlyn, expecting a laugh. Caitlyn did not laugh. She went quiet, somber. The manager said later it felt like the credit card had never been Caitlyn's idea. She did not set up the card. She walked out without signing anything. And Carter's mother understood exactly what that meant. 2 weeks later, on August 11th, they were both at the Sacred Heart Festival, held just across the street from Caitlyn's townhouse. They fought. Caitlyn's best friend Michelle was there and watched it happen. Carter had spent $100 on raffle tickets. For Caitlyn, who was working and saving and planning, this was not just careless spending. It was a pattern. She was doing the work. He was spending money as if their future was her responsibility alone. He was furious. She left the festival early. That was the last time Michelle ever saw her alive. He was making moves, small, careful ones, but they were not fast enough. Nobody outside that townhouse understood how dangerous the ground beneath her feet had become, because within 48 hours, Caitlyn Markham would not be packing her bags for Colorado. She would simply stop existing, and the man who would soon dial 911 to scream that she was missing already knew exactly where her body was. August 13th, 2011, a Sunday evening in Fairfield, Ohio. Caitlyn's townhouse on Shire Drive looked normal from the outside, lights on, car in the driveway. But inside, something was already broken. We know this because of what investigators found later on Carter's phone. Between 8 p.m. and 8:36 p.m. that night, before anyone else had even arrived, there were text messages between John Carter and Caitlyn. Deleted, deliberately wiped. Forensic recovery pulled them back out. Whatever was said in those 36 minutes, Carter did not want anyone to read it. At some point that night, a mutual friend arrived. His name was Brad. He stepped inside and looked around for Caitlyn. He was on the couch, laptop on her lap, eyes down. She did not get up, did not say hello, did not even look over when he walked in. For anyone who knew Caitlyn Markham, the girl who lit up every room, this was not a quiet night. This was something else entirely. They smoked weed together that night. Carter talked about Colorado, the move, the plans, the future. Caitlyn said almost nothing. She sat with the laptop open, working on schoolwork, as if the conversation happening around her belonged to people she no longer had anything to do with. Brad noticed. He stayed for a while. Then around 10:45 p.m., he said his goodbyes and left. He did not notice any scratches on Carter that evening. He would remember that detail later, and it would matter enormously. And then there were two, Carter and Caitlyn, alone in that townhouse, with whatever those deleted texts had already ignited between them. What happened in the next hour, no one outside that house can say for certain, because the only person who knows has spent 13 years refusing to speak the truth. But we know what the neighbor heard. He lived close enough that sound carried through the walls. And sometime that night, late after Brad had gone, she heard voices, muffled at first, then sharper, and then, cutting through everything else, one sound rose above the noise. A voice, saying no, 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 please, no, over and over again. The neighbor heard it, registered the terror in it, and then the line snapped. Silence. Not the quiet of a house going to sleep, but the sudden, suffocating silence that follows a struggle, the kind of quiet that means it is already too late. At some point after that, both phones went dark. Not Caitlyn's phone first, then Carter's. Both phones, at approximately the same time. Two separate devices belonging to two separate people, going completely inactive in the same window. There is only one explanation for that. One person in control of both phones, because the other person no longer could be. Carter left the townhouse, and before he did, the scene inside was arranged with very careful hands. Murphy, Caitlyn's dog, was locked inside her bedroom. This was not normal. Murphy was her companion. He followed her everywhere. He was never confined to one room. You lock a dog in a room when you do not want him near something happening in another part of the house. Murphy spent that entire night alone in that bedroom. No food, no water, no Caitlyn coming to check on him. By the time investigators arrived the next day, he had gone to the bathroom on the floor because no one had come back. That dog waited for her all night. She never came home. Caitlyn's purse was placed on her bed, not on the nightstand, not on a chair, in the center of the mattress, laid there deliberately, like a prop in a scene being constructed for an audience. Her wallet was inside, her driver's license, $300 in cash, her car keys sat nearby. A woman going to bed puts things somewhere natural, not in the exact center of her mattress. Her cell phone was the only thing missing. Not her money, not her ID, not her keys. Just the one object that could receive incoming calls and be used, for a little while, to make it look like she was still alive. Carter drove to his mother's house. He told police he arrived around 1:30 in the morning, watched television, and went to sleep after 4 a.m. But two teenagers who had snuck out that night saw something different. They were on Carter Street. Around 2 a.m., two cars moved through that neighborhood without their headlights on. Just dark shapes rolling through a dark street. Slow, deliberate, like they were trying not to disturb the night around them. The cars pulled into the garage at Carter's mother's house. They stayed inside for 5 to 15 minutes. Then they backed out. Two silhouettes cutting through the dark, heading back towards Shire Drive. Still no headlights. Somewhere in those quiet hours before dawn, a 21-year-old girl's body was moved out of that townhouse and into the shadows. Where she was taken would remain an agonizing mystery for the next 2 years. But that night, the night simply swallowed them whole. The next morning, John Carter picked up his phone. He dialed a friend, calmly spinning a story about how he was driving over to check on Caitlyn, acting just worried enough to set the stage. He hung up, and moments later, he dialed her father, screaming, crying, hysterical. Performance of a grieving fiancé had officially begun, and the curtain was about to rise. For the next 12 years, John Carter would cry at vigils, hug her father, pass out flyers, and go home to his family every single night. Let's start with the phone call. Not because it was the first suspicious thing Carter did, but because it is the most precise, the most measurable, the kind of detail that does not bend no matter how many times you look at it. In the morning of August 14th, Carter was on the phone with his friend Matt, building the story of a concerned fiancé who just could not reach her. He hung up with Matt. 38 seconds later, he called Caitlyn's father, Dave Markham, screaming, hysterical. Caitlyn was missing. She was gone. He could not find her anywhere. 38 seconds. In 38 seconds, you cannot park a car, walk across a street, enter a townhouse, check the bedroom, notice the purse, confirm she is not there, and call her father in a full panic. Which means Carter did not discover anything that morning. He already knew she was not there because he already knew exactly what had happened to her. The phone call to Dave was not the reaction of a man who just found something wrong. It was the next line in a script he had already written. Now listen to how he spoke on that 911 call. A genuine emergency call is a call for help. The person on the line asks questions, pleads, says, "See okay? What do I do? What do I do?" Carter's call was different. He was not asking for help. He was establishing facts. Her car is still there. Her purse is there. She was going to bed. She stays in the house by herself. He was building a scene on record with a dispatcher as his witness before he had even arrived. When the dispatcher asked if he was already there, Carter said he was on his way. So how did he know the purse was there? He had not arrived yet. He simply knew because he was the one who had placed it there. Then came the deflection. Carter pointed investigators toward the Sacred Heart Festival across the street. All those strangers, all those questionable people. The Markham family attorney heard this call years later and said it plainly. A 911 call is a call for help. John Carter's call was a call to inform. He was not asking anyone to find Caitlyn. He was telling a story calmly while managing to sound like he was falling apart. When the dispatcher asked if he and Caitlyn had argued recently, he said no, not at all. Everything was fine. Caitlyn's best friend Michelle knew that was a lie the moment she heard it. 2 nights before, at the very same Sacred Heart Festival Carter was now pointing to, Carter had spent $100 on raffle tickets. Caitlyn left the festival early. She was so furious. That was the last time Michelle ever saw her alive. Carter lied to the dispatcher without a second thought, not because he believed nobody would find out, but because he was already obsessed with controlling the narrative from the very first second. When police met Carter the next day, they noticed something immediately: scratches on his neck. Red, vertical marks that had not been there the night before. Brad, who had spent the evening with Carter until 10:45 p.m., confirmed he had not seen any scratches when he left. Carter's explanation changed twice. First, he said it was from his electric razor. Then he said he was not actually sure how he got them. An electric razor does not leave vertical scratches. It does not leave marks that appear overnight and require a shifting explanation. Caitlyn had fought back. The scratches were the proof. Within days of her disappearance, people close to Carter started noticing something that made their skin crawl. He was referring to Caitlyn in the past tense. Not once by accident, consistently, naturally. She was so strong. That was just how she was. Caitlyn had been missing for 72 hours. Her family was still holding on to hope, but Carter was already speaking about her like she was gone, because he knew she was. What followed was one of the most calculated performances this case would ever produce. Carter appeared on local television, voice breaking, eyes red. He said he just wanted to find Caitlyn and take her to Red Lobster for her birthday, because that was what she had been looking forward to. He passed out flyers with her face on them. He joined search parties. He stood at vigils with candles in his hands, looking into the eyes of her grieving father, hugging him, holding him while the man fell apart, while knowing the dark reality all along. For 12 years, John Carter wore the mask of a broken fiancé. He got married, had children, and through all of it kept agreeing to polygraph tests, performing cooperation. He failed all 3 polygraphs he ever took. The examiner on his final test in 2021 said Carter scored a 25 on a scale where anything above 0 indicates deception. He failed specifically on the question of whether he had disposed of Caitlyn's body. After the 3rd test, the detective looked Carter in the face and said, "I don't miss very often. I'm coming. I will never stop." Carter sat there, calm, collected, and said the machine was wrong. But while everyone was watching John Carter grieve, while he was lighting candles and failing polygraph after polygraph, somewhere in the house he shared with his mother, there was something hidden on a bedroom door. Something written, something that had been sitting there for years, in the room he slept in, while Caitlyn's family searched for answers. And when investigators finally found it, it would reveal exactly who John Carter had always been. April 7th, 2013. A cold morning in Cedar Grove, Indiana, a rural stretch called Big Cedar Road, an illegal dump site where people left things they did not want found. Man was out there looking for scrap metal, walking the creek bank, scanning the ground. And then he saw a bag, a plastic grocery bag, knotted at the top, sitting among the trash like it had been placed there deliberately. Inside were human remains. Stunned, he called 911 immediately and waited for help to arrive. When forensic anthropologists examined the recovery site, they realized something disturbing. The evidence suggested her remains had been moved at least twice after her death, hidden away long before being left at this final location. This meant one thing with complete certainty. Caitlyn's head had not decomposed inside that bag. It had been placed there after decomposition had already occurred somewhere else. Her body had been moved at least twice after her death, and Cedar Creek sat directly on the route between Fairfield, Ohio, and a farm owned by the Carter family, land John Carter had known his entire life. Then came the detail that made the forensic report impossible to read without feeling something break inside you. Forensic experts discovered clear signs of sharp force trauma on her wrist bone. There were distinct marks left by a blade, evidence that severe force had been used, showing that whoever did this had been cold, calculated, and deliberate. The cause of death could not be confirmed from skeletal remains alone. But those cut marks told investigators that what happened to Caitlyn after she died was not simple, and whoever did it was not in a hurry. When reporters reached out to Carter after the remains were confirmed, he did not call. He did not hold a press conference. He sent a text message. Now that is done. I have no interest in putting myself on camera. I just want to mourn my loss and put my life back together. Now that is done. Not, I am destroyed. Not, I hope they find who did this. Just, now that is done. The language of a man checking something off a list, not a man who just learned that the woman he claimed to love had been found in pieces at an illegal dump site. Caitlyn's funeral was held in August 2013. Her family lined the walls with her artwork. Everyone wore bright colors because Caitlyn had always been bright. And John Carter was there. He walked up to Dave Markham, the man who had chosen Caitlyn at 20 minutes old, and hugged him, held him while he cried, looked him in the eye, and said nothing true. In the months that followed, investigators briefly turned their attention toward a man named Gary Kung, who lived near Caitlyn's townhouse and worked at a nearby gas station. It went nowhere. Investigators cleared him completely. Years later, Dave Markham stopped at that same gas station. Kang recognized him, walked over quietly, and said, "I'm so sorry." An innocent man who had spent years carrying suspicion he never deserved, while the person who actually killed Caitlyn was living freely. An anonymous donor funded a private investigation. The PI, J. Ryan Green, went back to the beginning chasing ghosts. He even tracked down the car Brad had driven that night, spraying luminol into the trunk. It lit up, blood. The vehicle had been sold, resold, and chemically scrubbed over the years. The DNA was long gone. Another frustrating dead end in a case that seemed cursed by time. The reward for information had grown to $75,000. Nobody came forward. Dave Markham lobbied the Butler County Sheriff's Office directly, pushing, refusing to let his daughter's name go quiet. Investigation transferred to the Butler County Prosecutor's Office. Cold case investigator Paul Newton sat down with 10 boxes of files and started again from scratch. 118 interviews. Years of work. Breakthrough would not come from a dump site or a scrubbed vehicle. It would come from inside a quiet suburban home. Paul Newton was about to execute a new search warrant, and this time they were not looking for a body. They were looking for a mind. And what John Carter had left behind inside his own home was about to strip away every mask he had ever worn. Paul Newton had seen files go nowhere, cases dry up. He knew what a dead end looked like and what a solvable case looked like, even when everyone else had given up. When he sat down with 10 boxes of Caitlyn Markham's case files, he did not see a dead end. He saw a case that had been overlooked, left to go cold not because the truth was hidden, but because nobody had pushed hard enough, long enough. He started over. 118 interviews. Every phone record, every statement Carter had ever made, cross-referenced against every other statement. And slowly, the inconsistencies started forming a shape. Two of those interviews changed everything. Two teenagers who had snuck out on the night of August 13th came forward and described what they had seen on Carter's street. Two vehicles, moving without headlights, pulling into the garage at Carter's mother's house, staying inside for 5 to 15 minutes, then backing out and disappearing into the dark. One of those vehicles was a red Ford Focus, registered to John Carter. This was a physical vehicle, confirmed by registration records, moving through the night without lights at the exact window when investigators believed Caitlyn's body was being transported. Carter's alibi, that he had gone home and gone to sleep, had just collapsed. Newton needed one more piece to take this to a grand jury. He got it in February 2023 when a man named Jonathan Paulman was arrested on a perjury charge. Paulman was one of Carter's closest friends. He had been one of the first to arrive at Caitlyn's townhouse the morning she was reported missing. He had been interviewed in 2013, and he had lied, deliberately, to protect John Carter. When the perjury charge landed, search warrants were signed for two properties. One was where Paulman had been living. The other was the home Carter had shared with his mother when Caitlyn disappeared. The same home police had briefly searched in 2011 and found nothing. This time, they looked harder. What they found inside that house was not a weapon, not DNA. What they found had been sitting there for over a decade, in the room where Carter slept, in the space he came home to every night after lighting candles at vigils and hugging grieving fathers. It was a chilling poem, typed out and placed where he would see it every day. The words described causing fatal harm to a woman's wrists, framing it as a twisted poetic act. It aligned perfectly with the exact trauma found by forensic experts. The text wasn't a creative fantasy, it was a disturbing echo of reality. A detective who had interviewed Carter described him afterward in words that stayed with everyone who heard them. I've interviewed 1,000 people in my career, from homicides to trespasses. I had never once interviewed a psychopath. When John Carter walked out of that room, I turned to my colleague and said, "That's the first one." A video had also surfaced of Carter screaming at his current wife while she held their child. Profanity. Accusations, the kind of explosive, controlling rage that people who had known him described for years, the jealousy, the possessiveness, the anger that only came out behind closed doors. On March 22, 2023, nearly 12 years after Caitlyn had last been seen alive, John Carter was arrested at his place of work. Body camera footage captured the moment. Carter's first reaction was almost casual. He looked at the detective and said, "What evidence? There's nothing. There's no physical evidence that I did this." The detective looked back and said, "There's plenty of it." Carter said nothing after that. He was charged with 2 counts of murder. He posted a $1 million bond and went home under GPS monitoring to wait for his trial, scheduled for June 2024. The Markham family had waited 12 years for this moment. They were finally going to get their day in court, or so they thought, because what John Carter did next, just 1 week before that trial, was something nobody was prepared for. He killed her. He hid her body. He went to her funeral and held her father while he cried. He lived for 12 years like nothing happened, and the judge gave him 3 years. 1 week. That is how close this case came to a full murder trial. 1 week before Carter was scheduled to sit in front of a jury, his legal team called prosecutors. They wanted to make a deal. The prosecution faced a hard reality. No DNA, no murder weapon, no confirmed cause of death, no witness who had seen Carter commit the act. What they had was powerful, but a defense attorney can take circumstantial evidence apart piece by piece in front of a jury. And if even one juror walks out unconvinced, Carter walks out free, forever, with no possibility of being tried again. That risk is what forced their hand. They accepted the deal. On June 7, 2024, John Carter stood before Judge Daniel Hoggy and entered one word into the official record: guilty. Not guilty of murder, guilty of involuntary manslaughter, a third-degree felony, built on the legal framework that her death had been an accident, something minor that went wrong. That is what 13 years of waiting produced. Dave Markham sat in the front row with Caitlyn's sister Allie beside him. Before sentencing, Dave stood and read a letter to the court. "Not a day goes by that I don't think of Caitlyn. Let him feel the pain that so many of us have endured for the past 13 years. He talked about what Carter had stolen, not just Caitlyn's life, but every version of her life that never got to happen. The career, the art, the woman she was becoming, all of it erased, while the man responsible spent those same years raising his own children and watching them grow. Caitlyn's best friend Michelle Feist also spoke. She said something that cut through every legal argument and procedural explanation. It's nice that we at least know the truth. But really, what is the truth? We still don't even really know exactly what happened, and he's still kind of denying it in some way. After 13 years, after a guilty plea, after bedroom door poems and forensic reports, they still did not fully know, because Carter had never said, not once, not to any detective, not to the father who had trusted him with his daughter for 6 years. Carter's defense attorneys asked for probation, no prison time. For a man who had concealed a body for 2 years, failed 3 polygraphs across a decade, written poems about slitting wrists, and kept his murdered fiance's school papers in his home. They asked for probation. Judge Howhay rejected it. He imposed the maximum, 36 months, 3 years, and in doing so, he said, "We don't get to hit a reset button. We don't get to undo what's been done. Boy, I'm a great guy other than that day that I killed someone." Carter stood through all of it and said nothing, not one word, not to the judge, not to Dave, not to Michelle, not to Allie, who had been 15 when her sister vanished. Absolute silence. 14 months into his sentence, Carter filed a motion for early release. His attorney argued he was a model inmate who tutored other prisoners. Prosecutor Gimoser made an unusual counteroffer. Rather than simply opposing the motion, he told Carter, "Explain what happened that night. Tell the truth. Give this family the answer they have never received. Do that, and we will not oppose your release." Carter's attorney took the offer back to his client. A few weeks later, the attorney returned with Carter's answer. No. Carter chose to stay in prison rather than tell the truth about what he did to Caitlyn Markham. He looked at an opportunity to walk out early and decided, the silence is worth more to me than the freedom. And then his attorney stood in open court and said Carter was devastated, that Carter was asking investigators to go out and find the real person responsible. The real person, the man who had said guilty in open court, whose bedroom door carried a poem describing exactly what was done to Caitlyn's wrist, was now claiming through his lawyer that he had been pressured into the plea. Carter's mother sat in that courtroom and told reporters there was information about this case not being discussed publicly. On advice of counsel, she could not say more. Judge Howhay denied the early release motion. He said the court would find it disingenuous to suggest that 18 months addressed what had been done, not just the killing, but the years of silence while Dave Markham searched for his daughter. Jonathan Pullman, whose perjury arrest had triggered the entire chain of events leading to Carter's indictment, had his charge quietly dismissed. He walked out free, no conviction, no prison time. The man whose lies had shielded Carter for nearly a decade faced no lasting legal consequence whatsoever. And the prosecutor's formal court filing raised a haunting question that has never been answered, whether the severe actions taken to stage the scene occurred while she was still fighting for her life, or if they were done afterward. It is a dark, lingering question mark that Carter has chosen every single time to leave in absolute silence. On June 10, 2026, 15 years after Caitlyn disappeared, the Ohio House of Representatives passed House Bill 459, popularly known as Caitlyn's Law, a bill that eliminates the statute of limitations for crimes connected to a murder, including tampering with evidence and abuse of a corpse. Dave Markham had stood before the Ohio General Assembly in March 2026 and said, "How can these heinous crimes not be prosecuted? The person or persons responsible should not be able to hide under a time limit." And then he said something that stayed in that chamber long after he sat down. When an arrest was finally made, 13 years after her disappearance, I was relieved to know I would finally get answers. Much to my shock and dismay, that was not true. The bill passed the House. It now moves to the Ohio Senate. Caitlyn's name is being written into Ohio law. John Carter is currently incarcerated at the North Central Correctional Institution in Marion, Ohio. His projected release date is June 2027. He will walk out of those doors. He will go home. He will eat at restaurants and watch his children grow and live the life he protected with 12 years of silence. Once, in front of cameras and search parties and a community desperate to find the woman he had killed, Carter said he just wanted to find Caitlyn and take her to Red Lobster for her birthday. That was the mask. This is what was underneath it. And so the questions remain, hanging over Fairfield like a heavy fog that never fully lifted. Did John Carter truly act alone that night, or did someone else help him move those vehicles through the dark without headlights? If Caitlyn was still alive when those marks were left on her wristbone, does a 3-year sentence even belong in the same conversation as justice? Jonathan Pullman is still out there. The system has closed its books. But for Dave Markham and for everyone who ever loved Caitlyn, the clock is still ticking. Because masks can fade and deals can be signed, but the truth has no expiration date. Caitlyn Markham never got to be 22. She never got to paint another canvas, photograph another face, or become the woman her father knew she would be. She never got her birthday dinner. She never got Colorado. She never got any of the future she had been carefully, quietly building toward. But because of her, Ohio law is changing. And somewhere in a prison in Marion, Ohio, the man who took everything from her is counting down the days until he walks free, while her father is still counting butterflies.